How you doing, family? Doing okay? Who was here this morning or at Redcliffe this morning? Who was on our retreat this weekend, our advance? Sorry to all of you, because you've got me again. Gonna look at this face only for a few short remaining minutes, and then I'll be on my camel and chugging back to Alice Springs across the country, so it's okay. Thank you, band. You guys were awesome. Well done. Let's give the band a little quick thank you. Many times you know that you want to change. You want to change. You know what the problem is. You know all the various courses of action, what they could be. The problem is, how do I find an internal wellspring where the change I kind of know that I should make and I sometimes wish I'd make, and in my best moments I'll even commit to maybe promising God and maybe promising others. But where do I find this wellspring to sustain it so it doesn't just become like that classic January thing? You know the classic January thing? The gym membership. And by February, it's a coaster on your desk that gathers 6 inches of dust and you can't even remember where it's from anymore. You can't remember your way to the gym anymore. What about the dietary rehab that you did? You said you were going to do the paleo diet. But then, my friends, you discovered Baskin-Robbins ice cream. It is not part of the paleo diet. And you started off, January, 2 weeks into February, 6 weeks of really good eating, hips, thighs, and buttocks, thanking you for it. And then, March came. And then Monday came, and Wednesday and Friday came, and Christmas and Easter, and fried turkey and donuts at church. And, but we don't just do it with silly things like gym memberships. How many courses have you started that you haven't finished? How many hobbies have you begun? And you even bought the uniform, got the shiny bells and whistles, and now it hangs somewhere in the back of the closet. And every time you see it, just cover it up with something else because you just feel a little bit of shame, don't you? No? I'm a DIY person. I kind of look at everything and reckon, I could do that. And so one time I was reading about Ernest Shackleton's voyage. Remember Shackleton? Antarctic voyages. And he had a shipwreck experience, and the shipwreck, left them stranded. And so what they did is they found some natives that were living in the area, and they constructed a kayak, a sea kayak, out of the materials that were available, which were some bamboo poles, some canvas, and some whale bone and some seal skin and all sorts of stuff. And using the native plants, they were able to DIY themselves a kayak that took them hundreds of kilometers to get rescued. Pretty unbelievable story. So I heard this story and I thought, I could definitely do that. Not the like icy cold, dangerous, getting eaten by polar bears bit, but definitely like the kayak manufacturer. I could do that. And I didn't have everything they had, but I definitely had bamboo poles got from Bunnings Warehouse. And I couldn't get seal gut, which they used to join the poles together, but I thought, well, this is the modern world. Shackleton will forgive me if I use duct tape. And I didn't have seal skin to make the hull of the craft, and so I used an assortment of various garbage bags available at the previously mentioned Bunnings Warehouse. And that was cool. We made it, and it took me a long time. I'd come home from work and do it and cut and saw and chop and do things. And I finally, launch day came. Everybody say launch day. It was cool, launch day. I launched it in my pool. My kids were there. We paddled around in the pool, and it was really, really cool. It was ugly, but it was functional. A lot like my face, really, sometimes. My 16-year-old daughter says to me. So I've got that one. But there's a few other DIY things I did. One time I decided I was going to make a jacket, and I taught myself how to use a sewing machine, got the sewing machine out. I have 3 daughters and a wife. We have a sewing machine. They never use it. And I said, I'm going to show you women up. You know what? I believe in equal opportunity. The days are gone where only sewing belongs to the women. Thank you very much. And I scoured the internet for secret plans and clever tricks to design myself a really cool jacket. And I made it. It's still sitting from 7 years ago in my cupboard, complete except for the one sleeve I have never gotten back to putting it on. So it's kind of like, whenever that fashion comes where jackets only need one sleeve, I'm busting that bad boy out. Don't you worry about that. I've actually got a few projects where I've started them, and I started with great intent, but I didn't carry it through. And our house is just peppered with little reminders of things where I came up with a harebrained scheme to do something and to start it. My latest one was whittling. Do you know what whittling is? With whittling, you take a very sharp pocket knife. Some are designed specifically for the purpose. Some are just sharp pocket knives. And you take a block of wood and you just chip away at the wood very cautiously and very carefully until the block of wood becomes what it is you're trying to make. I was trying to make a Santa Claus head that could be given as gifts to everybody that came to our Christmas lunch on Christmas Day. But after I made my first one and my daughter looked at it and said, it kind of looks like a plastic Santa Claus that somebody microwaved. Not nice at all. She got no Christmas presents this year. Then I only made one and hung it on our tree, and no one got their kind of microwave Santa as a gift. But while I was doing that, I cut my finger with my pocket knife, because you always, when you use a knife, you always cut away. See, all you know it, and I know it, but I just thought, just this once, I can take it. And my knife slipped, and I slashed my finger. It was a 1 centimetre cut. And it was 3 millimeters deep, and it's only on my index finger, my talking to my daughter's finger. And I did what every responsible father does in those moments, thought, well, that definitely needs stitches, but why would I have a medical professional treat me when I've got super glue in the cupboard? And so I grabbed out the Loctite, the instant super glue, dries in like 1 second. Now look, this cannot be taken as medical advice, so it comes with a disclaimer. But in the people healing business, there is a product very like instant Loctite superglue used for stitching up animals and people and all that sort of stuff. And the stuff you get for $1 from Bunnings Warehouse is not medically recommended, but I found out it really does work pretty good. Check that bad boy out. I still have complete functionality. Can do everything what it needs to do. So I'm a bit of a DIY guy. What about you? Are you a DIY person? Is your life peppered with projects you've begun, but you weren't able to finish? And it's okay when it's harmless stuff like whittling or jacket making or kayak assembly or something like that. But what about other projects? What about when there's something internal that is definitely going to require growth and change? What about when you know that Jesus is calling you to surrender some unsurrendered turf that's actually in here or in here? And when it's in here or in here, it tends to come out here, doesn't it? And it definitely comes out here with what you do with your hands and your feet. Isn't that true? And so sometimes what we do is we become inspired, especially in Christian worship, a lot of times we become inspired that it's time for me to leave something behind. It's time for me to walk into something new. It's time for me to deal with that thing, that recurring thought. It's time for me to bust that habit. But why do we find it hard? Why do we find it a defeating process where so many times in the moments where we're deeply moved by conviction, it's easy for us to make a commitment, but it becomes harder for us to follow through on a commitment, doesn't it? Now, of course, this has been a tremendous issue for me my whole life, because 20 years ago when I found Jesus, I was severely traumatized, severely depressed, debilitatingly so. I was incredibly triggered anytime I was around people, and I was just a traumatized little soul that retreated into my shell. I'd been doing it since I was 10 years old. Panicked when I was around people. The only time that didn't happen is if I'd smoked enough weed, snorted enough cocaine, or drank myself into enough numbness that wouldn't happen anymore. So of course I found Jesus, and man, when Jesus came into my world, he made such a big difference and just began to heal and knit together all the broken and all the holes that were in my soul. Jesus just began to knit them together again. In our service this morning, we talked about this great name that God gives the people of Israel, and he says, I am Yahweh Rapha. I am the Lord that healeth thee. That's the King James Version. Who loves a bit of King James? I do. I quoted from the King James in our church in Alice recently, and an 85-year-old linguist emailed me saying, Pastor Ben, do you think in the modern age the King James Version is the most appropriate way to quote the Bible to communicate to a modern contemporary culture? I thought, hey, you're good. The 85-year-old is less religious than I am. I like it. I like it. I am the Lord that healeth thee. And the word heal, Rapha, in the Hebrew language means to darn. Like when you get a pair of socks with a hole in it or something other unmentionable with a hole in it, then what you do is you take a needle and a thread and you begin to stitch it and you sew it together and you weave it together and you slowly close up that hole through the process of darning, don't you? Who's ever darned something before? Look at that. This is a darn good church, Pastor Joe. By the way, you definitely should keep your beard. And Biblical wives will just let their husband grow a beard like the Bible says. So when Jesus came into my life, he began to darn up all the broken parts of my life. And on the one hand, I was receiving incredible healing. I had gone from being isolated and alone to now having somebody. I'd been gone from being a spiritual and existential orphan floating around on this planet like a piece of homeless space dust. But now I had a father. Now I had someone who adopted me into his family. Now I had somebody who called me his child. Someone who called me blessed. Someone who called me righteous. Someone who called me beloved. Someone who called me accepted. Someone who called me new creation. And man, it was awesome. Things really began to change. But can I tell you, there was some stuff that I knew had to change, but it wasn't changing the same way some of the other stuff was. I was still really craving smoking, still really craving drinking, just excessively knocking myself out with alcohol. And I'd worship God and I'd be ashamed and I'd be embarrassed. And man, I'd come to church for 5 years when I first found Jesus, hoping no one ever really knew what the real me was going on. Because even sitting in church, I thought, man, if these people knew how broken I still am, they wouldn't even let me come in the door. Now they let me pastor. And some things were just going along, and my soul had been filled with the glory of God. I was filled with the Holy Spirit, and everything improved. And yet there were some things that just wouldn't change. And I followed Jesus for 5 years before I got the courage to open up to someone and say, things just aren't changing for me. And I thought that would be the worst day of my life when I opened up and said, after 5 years, I'm still falling and I'm still smoking that weed. I'm still falling and every now and then I just can't sleep and I have anxiety and panic attacks. And so I drink myself to sleep that night. And 5 years later, I should be a better Christian than this because God's so good, but man, I'm not good. And they said, oh, that's not a real problem. They said, all it is that you haven't learnt yet how to guard your heart. What? Yeah, you just haven't learned. It's like this. If you want to play cricket, you can learn how to hold a bat. You can learn how to line up your hips and your legs with the ball when it comes towards you. You can learn which stroke to make. You can learn how to identify something. So a cricket coach would coach you and teach you there are steps you need to take if you want to be successful in this endeavor. And in the Christian life, when somebody takes us and coaches us the steps we need to take so that we can be successful in a certain endeavor, that's very close to this thing called discipleship, where people help us learn to follow Jesus. We follow Jesus. We're on the way. It's like step by step by step by step following Jesus. And they taught me a secret over a successive period. I'm going to tell you what that period was. The period was 10 weeks. He said, I'm going to meet with you for 10 weeks and I'm going to teach you how to follow Jesus in these bits of your life. There was other areas where I was following Jesus. No one had to teach me. I could just do it. I could worship Jesus and get lost in his presence in corporate worship. I was tithing, I was giving, I was generous. I was actually sharing my faith a lot. And one of the things that worried me about my own failure was I'm sharing my faith and seeing people come to Jesus. But man, what if they found out all the areas I fail? Maybe they wouldn't want to follow Jesus anymore because it's like, am I selling them a lie or something? And there were some areas that were going well, but this few areas I just still couldn't get a breakthrough in. And over 10 weeks, somebody taught me. And after a 5-year struggle, a 10-week journey completely changed my life. Completely changed my life. So I might come back here in about 3 years and tell you what that was, eh? In Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, I'm going to read from the NIV. I think we're going to put it up on the screen. It says this: above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. First of all, there's a sense of priority, isn't there? Because it's above all else. It's like, what's the most important thing you should do? What's like the thing that is of primary importance above all else? What should I do? I should guard my heart. Guard my heart. And why should I do that? Well, because it says everything you do flows from this. Say flows. Everything in life flows from the state of your heart. And what we do is we try to change the state of our hands, what I'm doing and what I'm up to and what I'm doing. We try to change that, but actually what I'm doing is not a result of just some random processes of nature, but what I'm doing is a result of what's going on in my heart. It's an outworking. And most of the time, what it is it is a fruit. It's a fruit system. And what I tried to do stupidly all that time when I tried to stop smoking, tried to stop drinking, tried to stop snorting stuff, what I was doing that whole time is I was picking fruit off a tree thinking, how can I get rid of this fruit system? And what I didn't realize is that a fruit system grows because a root system exists. And instead of being a fruit picker, what you have to become is a root killer. You pick the fruit off, it just comes back all the time. And always, you and I, we're in danger of just focusing our efforts in the wrong areas. Oh, I've got to stop being naughty. I've got to stop doing this. I've got to stop doing that. No, actually, it's mostly not a matter of what you need to stop doing. It's a matter of what you need to start doing to experience transformation. And Proverbs begins by taking us by the hand and says, above all else, the first priority is to guard your heart because everything you do flows from that. Let me read you a couple of different translations so you get the sense. All the English translations are good because they all capture different shades of meaning. I'm a Bible language buff, nerd, geek, whatever, no social life, and I love studying this stuff. And just every translation captures a little bit of an extra bit of secret sauce on the thing. The NET says this, guard your heart with all vigilance, for from it are the sources of life. The ESV says, keep your heart with all vigilance. What a great word, say vigilance. For from it flow the springs of life. The Message says, keep vigilant watch over your heart. That's where life starts. So what we can surmise from all the different ways the translation captions is, first of all, it's pretty important, this heart of yours, isn't it? It's pretty important. It's so important that it's the thing you should do above all else. It's the thing you should do vigilantly. It's the thing you should do diligently, is placing a guard on your heart. Now, some of the translations, they don't say guard, they say keep. Keep your heart with all vigilance. Now, if you go to a shop is run normally by a shop. Okay? If you have a cricket team, the wickets are looked after by the wicket. If you go to a golf course, the green on the golf course is looked after by a green. If you like tasty, sweet, sweet honey, the bees that produce the honey are looked after by a bee. You have a heart and you are your own heart keeper. You're the shopkeeper of your heart. You're the wicket keeper of your heart. You're the beekeeper of your heart. And the Bible says something very important, that you and I will often find an unpalatable and a distasteful truth. Here it is. It's no one else's job to keep my heart. It's not even God's job to keep my heart. It's my job to keep my heart. And our journey for transformation often begins when we take a deeper look at what's going on in our heart and ask ourselves the question, am I keeping it with all diligence? Am I keeping it like a shopkeeper, like a beekeeper, like a wicket keeper? Am I careful what's going on there? First of all, we have to understand our job is keeping our heart. It's not the pastor's job. It's not my partner's job. It's not my wife's job. It's none of your job to make sure my heart's okay. It's my job to make sure my heart's okay. Now just think of that, because that's an obviously sounding truth, right? You're sitting there going, Pastor Ben, please say something far more profound than this is like really basic and boring. Is that right? Just give me like an eye close of silence if you're like falling asleep here. A couple of you, okay, good. But see, the thing is, when we go through a tough time, what we begin to do is we cultivate sometimes a little bit of resentment in our heart towards other people. When something's not right in our heart, we begin to resent others for the fact. Isn't that true? You have a down day and then someone comes up and they're happy and you like want them dead. Does that ever happen to you? Usually that's only morning people. Morning people are the only ones I do that to. But of course, it's my job to keep my heart. It's not your job to keep my heart. So there's this thing in modern society called victimhood, and victimhood is simply this, where all of the things that are wrong in me and with me are somebody else's fault, and unless somebody else solves it, I'm just going to sit here and wallow. And I can tell you now, that is one of the number one indicators of depression, is a sense of victimhood and a narrative that says it's everybody else's fault, it's everybody else's problem, it's nothing to do with me, I'm just a hapless victim here, how unfortunate for me, okay? Now, I'm qualified to tell you this because I've come through the journey where the doorway to change for me involved me taking responsibility to guard my heart instead of waiting and hoping that somebody else would do it. And changing my prayers to God, would you help me guard my heart? Instead of God, why aren't you guarding my heart? So we have to begin to take responsibility to guard our own heart. Now we need to do that, and it's very important because the Bible says, for from it flow the issues of life. From it are the springs of life. That's where life comes from. Now I come from Alice Springs. It's a desert. It's 1,500 kilometers from the nearest ocean in any direction or more. And how we water our town is a big artesian basin. They say beneath Alice Springs, where I live, is a body of water that is 1 million times the size of Sydney Harbour. Think about that. Leave that tap running, man. It's okay. It's okay. Wash your car with the hose, put the sprinkler on, have 5 showers a day, hot ones. That's what my teenage daughters do. Anyway, shake your hair and leave hair everywhere so it looks like a Wookiee got blended, you know. Crazy place, Alice Springs. There's no water restrictions because we've just got so much water, and they have this little meter that calculates how much water the town uses, and they say we're good for about 1 million years. That's pretty good, isn't it? I don't know if I'll still be around in 1 million years, but you know, I'm moisturising. So here's the thing, though. There's a controversy where we live, and the controversy is called fracking. Do you know what fracking is? Fracking is a form of mining where what they do is they pump stuff down into the ground to crack it and see if it releases gas or whatever it is to mine it. And there's a big controversy in Central Australia because our water supply is derived from underground water. So the big controversy is if they do that, if they mess with what's going on underground and they pump this gas in, or they're looking for stuff and then the gas leaks into our water supply, then they will poison our water supply and then we won't have any water. That's really bad, isn't it? And so there's a controversy, and the controversy goes like this, whether you're for it or against it doesn't really matter to me, it's just an illustration. The controversy goes is should we let people frack our water supply? Should we let stuff get in there? Should we mess with it? And I was thinking about this while I was listening to some public debate on it a little while ago, but I was also thinking that the same goes for what Proverbs says about your heart, because it says from your heart springs everything else. From your heart flows the issues of life. And actually that metaphor that comes to us from Proverbs is that your heart is an underground spring. That is, you can see stuff when it bubbles up, but it comes from somewhere invisible that you can't see, and you should be very careful about what's going on down there in that invisible place, because by the time it bubbles up and has affected the rest of your life, it's far too late to worry about the water quality now. So I begin to think about this question, thought, man, I tell you what, I don't think I'm letting anyone frack with my heart. What about you? Is someone fracking with your heart? I think you and I should be really careful that no one fracks with our heart. Have to be incredibly cautious saying it, don't you? It's an underground spring, and if something gets into it, then it could flow up and affect all sorts of other stuff. There's horrible stories where I come from of white explorers that decided they wanted the land that some Aboriginal tribes were on, and the Aboriginal tribes had a spring that was bubbling up from which they would use their water source, which caused them to gravitate to the area. And so these early settlers decided if we poison the water source, they will drink it, they will die, and then we can take that land. And there's actually numerous horrible and terrible tales like that from Central Australia. See, the thing that Proverbs says, you are in danger of that because your heart is an underground spring and it flows up and it waters the whole rest of your life. And if it's poisoned, you might die. So we should be careful. So what is the heart? The heart, when the Bible mentions the word heart, whether it's the Hebrew in the Old Testament or the Greek in the New Testament, is talking about the point of confluence, the seat where 3 parts of you come together. First of all, it is your mind. Your mind is the thoughts that you think. Everybody say mind. Everybody say thoughts. The thoughts that you think. The second thing it is your will. Everybody say will. Your will is the choices that you make. Every time you make a choice, you are exercising your will. Your mind, the thoughts you think, your will, the choices that you make. The third part is your emotions. Everybody say emotions. Your emotions are the feelings that you feel. Everybody say feelings. But now say it with feelings. Say feelings. Shimmy when you say it, just because you can, because you're free in Jesus' name. So the Bible says this, that you have this confluence in your life, this point where 3 areas come together. Your mind, the thoughts you think, your will, the choices you make, and your emotions, the feelings that you feel. That is what your heart is. Of course, if you were going to talk about modern neuroscience, then we wouldn't necessarily use the word heart. But when we use the word heart, what we're talking about in the brain is the point of confluence where your dorsal, lateral, prefrontal cortex lives. You know that bit? Have you stretched it today? Good, good. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is where logic and rational and thinking, that's where your mind lives. It's where you think your thoughts and make your choices and evaluate and study and learn. It's where language growth happens and all sorts of stuff. When you're trying to ride a bike, you're activating your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. That's one part, your mind, your thoughts, you think. Then there's your feelings. Your feelings are your limbic system. It's the system in your brain that can totally hijack you when something goes on. You know what I'm saying? Totally hijack you, like you're walking along and you see a snake and you go, oh my gosh! And you take the Mr. Miyagi stance. Have you ever had it happen to you? I live in Alice Springs when we see snakes like that all the time. So you just don't even worry anymore. You just pick it up and you do a couple of laps of a skipping rope with it. It's just normal to have it. Sometimes you think it'll look good on a barbecue, but you can't do it because they're protected. But you get your limbic system, the emotion center of your brain. What it can do is it can hijack you, can't you? Now, it's designed to help you do the fight or flight thing, where what happens is when something really bad and life-threatening happens, you're supposed to go, oh my gosh, and it hijacks you. And before you even notice you've done it, have you ever had that? That's your limbic system. It's the limbic system hijack. But of course, because we don't live in primitive conditions anymore, then it's not often we have to run away from a dinosaur or that we see an anaconda coming for us or something like that. But now in our society, we have other causes of stress that our system, our limbic system says, oh my gosh, this is dangerous. Something's going to happen to me. And we have limbic system hijacks all the time. I live in a house with 3 teenagers. We have limbic system hijacks all the time. Someone can run out of lip gloss and bam, there's an explosion. Someone can use the wrong person's hairbrush and World War IV breaks out. Limbic system, but that stuff happens to you all the time, where what happens is somebody says something and you snap at them and you say something you never meant to say. You ever had that? Or you thought you dealt with something and then something happens and it rears its head and you respond completely badly? Or what about you married people? You start fighting about something, but eventually you realize that what we're fighting about is not what we're actually fighting about. What we're fighting about is that thing 3 weeks ago. Limbic system hijack, okay? And so what the Bible says is we've got to guard our dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, what we think about, how we apply focus, what we actually allow to permeate, what we study, what we use our rationality for. We've got to guard our limbic system. That means we've got to be careful what we let hijack us. We've got to train ourselves not to live in a hijacked state. By the way, if you live in a hijacked state, you're creating depression for yourself and burnout, by the way. But we've got to guard these things and try to work out, okay, so how can I drive it instead of let it drive me? Now, here's the thing about emotion, which lives in your limbic system, is you either cultivate it or you tolerate it. Most people have to learn the difference between letting their emotions drive them and then realizing that they can actually drive their emotions. The feelings that you feel, they're not unquestionable. I had to learn as a recovering drug addict that feeling like drinking myself to sleep wasn't an unbreakable law that meant just because I felt that way I had to do it. Just because I felt like I wasn't lovable, that doesn't mean I'm not lovable. You are allowed to question your feelings. Turn to the person next to you and say, well, I'll be. You're allowed to question your feelings. And in fact, what happens is if you don't question your feelings, if you don't start examining them and thinking, hang on, what is it that I'm feeling here and why am I feeling this? Then they start to drive you. But part of the process of driving emotion and learning to cultivate it instead of tolerate it is learning to question what's really going on in yourself. And should I make a decision based on this feeling that I feel? In fact, what they say is when you are in the middle of a limbic system hijack, that means you're about to blow and go fight or flight. You have 6 seconds. You have 6 seconds before that thing can take over and create a pathway that you're going to walk down. But if within that 6-second window you go, hang on, calm down, Benji, calm down. It's only a guy asking your daughter to date. You have 6 seconds. And so what you do is you say, okay, in that 6-second window, I'm going to take a breath. Remember that whole thing? Take a deep breath, count to 10. Why they say count to 10 is because you only actually need 6, but 6 plus 4 is 10, and give yourself a margin for success. So you're guarding, when you practice the 6-second principle, you're guarding your emotion. But you've got to learn, how is it that I guard the way I feel? How is it that I guard my thoughts and my thinking? And that's the last bit, which is the will, the choices that we make, which is where all of this stuff lives together. And then you add to that this other bit. You know what I'm going to say, don't you? Of course it is. Turn the person next to you and say, it's your anterior cingulate cortex. Make it easier. Tell them it's your ACC. In the anterior cingulate cortex is the bit of you that governs love and empathy and compassion, okay? So when you take these bits, when you take your limbic system, your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and your anterior cingulate cortex, what you do is you now have your heart. So you now know those are the bits of your life that the Bible is talking about when it says, guard your heart. Be the shopkeeper of those bits of your life, okay? And if you do, then of course your mind and the thoughts that you think will become healthier. Your will and the choices that you make will not only become healthier, but will be a little bit easier. And your emotions that you're either cultivating or tolerating will also help. So what does the Bible say you should do? Well, it says that you should guard it, that you should watch over it like a sentry watches over a jail cell, like a beekeeper watches over their bees, like a greenkeeper watches over a green. So how do you do this? Well, there's many ways. I just want to talk to you about one way. Is that okay? Turn to the person next to you and say, good, it sounds like he's not going to go forever. I'm going to give you one way. Here it is. You ready? How do I guard my heart? How do I guard my limbic system, my dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and my anterior cingulate cortex? You guys are good. Have a PhD in neuroscience right now and give yourself the rest of the week off. How do I do it? Here it is. Are you ready? Harness the power of focus. Focus. Everybody say focus. Now turn to the person next to you and focus on them in a weird way and say focus. And if you're single and they're single, now's a good time to say, can I have your number? No, don't do that. Don't do that. That's not good. Okay, here we go. When Proverbs says, guard your heart, be very cautious about your heart because everything else comes there, the number one way you do it is you harness the power of focus. Focus is the lens of the mind. Focus is the lens. You know, when I want to take a photograph with my phone, I have a Samsung that's called a poor person's iPhone. When I want to take a photo, be it a selfie or a landscape or something, what I must do is I must take the lens on the camera and point it at the right stuff. Are you with me? How many photographers are in the room? When you want to capture something wonderful, when you want to capture the bit that you want, there's bits that you don't want to capture, there's backgrounds you don't want in, there's people you don't want in, you know, all that sort of stuff. You kind of make your boyfriend stand on the outside of the family photo in case one day you break up and then you can crop him out and still keep the good photo where you've got your best Christmas outfit on. So you harness, what are you doing in those moments? You're harnessing the power of focus. You're taking what you want to capture and you're giving it attention, okay? Now, focus is the lens of the mind. In fact, we're all going to say that together. Ready? Focus is the lens of the mind. Go. Okay? Focus is how I guard my heart. I be careful about what I focus on. I be cautious about it because what I focus on will cause my mind to think thoughts about it, will cause my will to be influenced towards choices, and will cause my feelings to come into line and feel things associated with what I focus. Did you know that cinematographers and movie makers absolutely know this fact? Because what they do is they capture your focus when they make a film by creating this thing that in film or photography we call perspective. And they show you a certain perspective, and then everybody in the whole room watching the film will embrace the perspective together. And if we hook your brains and your hearts up all to a magnetic resonance imaging machine, then what we would find is that for the most part, you'll all be thinking the same things and feeling the same things when you watch the movie, because the filmmaker has created a way of harnessing your focus, setting your perspective, and we all see the same thing, the scenes, the angle, the faces, the music, and it all affects. It hijacks and harnesses our focus, and because it harnesses our focus, it captures our mind, it captures our will, and it captures our emotions. Who here doesn't like murder? You really should have your hand up by now, everybody in the room. Okay, who here on a given day thinks it's not a good thing to murder someone? Okay, but who here has ever watched my favorite, rom-com that my wife and I is our favorite chick flick, Rambo 3? Or you put in yours, okay? And what happens is, even though you're not murderous, even though you don't like killing and death because you're a compassionate, loving, God-fearing Christian folk, but what happens is, it's possible for a filmmaker to put you through a film experience where they have captured the lens of your mind and harnessed the power of your focus and set your perspective. And so you will watch a murder, you watch the bad guy get a bullet right between the eyes and you'll go, yeah! Won't you? Turn to the person next to you and say, I've seen you do it. You got zapped in Star Wars, they got their arm cut off with a lightsaber. In the Marvel movie, Thor ripped them apart, or Hulk stepped on them or something like that. And you went, yeah, yes, victory, right? But you're not a murderous person, you're not a violent person. What about this? Who here just doesn't think that it's generally good to practice adultery? Yeah, most of your hands will be up. But of course, you'll watch a film, and there's some famous films that have come out that really mess with your head, because you watch these two people, they might have been from painful backgrounds, they might have been in unfulfilling marriages or something like that, and then by the end of the movie, everybody in the cinema is going, kiss, 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 and when they did, you were like, oh, that's so nice, forgetting the fact that you just swallowed hook, line, and sinker an ungodly relationship. But why did you do that? Not because you're ungodly, because a filmmaker is a genius at captivating the power of your focus and harnessing it. And when your focus is harnessed, it really steers your mind and the thoughts you think, your will and the choices you make, and your emotions and the feelings you feel. We recently watched this great film, Ride Like a Girl. Have you seen it? The first female to ever win the Melbourne Cup. We don't sanction gambling, by the way. And it was amazing. And at the end of it, my daughters and I are like hugging and high-fiving. I'm not going to plot spoil by telling you everybody dies in the end. But at the end of it, it was just a feel-good movie. And we were all like tears down our face. Oh, let's have a big family hug. Why? Because the filmmaker harnessed the power of our focus and our attention. Okay. So here's the thing, my friends. Me learning how to do this was one of the things that changed me, because this is what my driver was. The fruit system was use drugs, drink yourself to sleep. Why? Because what was inside me, what got into my heart, was trauma and violence and pain and abuse and rejection, and voices that said, you're nothing. And voices that said, you don't even deserve to be born, and shame and the feeling that I just didn't even deserve every breath of oxygen I was taking. And that was already in my heart. And you'll be like that. You'll have had some stuff that's gotten into your heart. And because it's in your heart, it hijacks your focus, and you begin to dwell on it. You begin to think about it. You begin to meditate on it. You begin to mutter and to mumble, and you replay conversations and you replay situations. And 50 years later, you can still flash back to them, can't you? And it's in there. And because it's in there, it hijacks your mind and the thoughts you think, and your will and the choices you make, and your emotions and the feelings that you feel. And it drives fruit, which becomes actions that you take, and a direction in life, and choices you don't want to make, but you do, because the power of your focus has been harnessed. And because it's been harnessed, it creates a fruit system. But the root system is where you're focusing. And the Bible calls us to something. Hey, here's the good advice. Be very careful. Above everything else, guard your heart. I'll say it a different way. Careful where you focus. Careful what you focus on. Because there's some things you can focus on that are incredibly detrimental to you. Careful who you focus on, because most of the time when you focus on people, that can really not help. And you are a people. So especially focusing on you is a really difficult one. Careful focusing on nothing, because when you focus on nothing, you activate the Venn neurons in your brain. You know what Venn's neurons are? Turn the person next to you and go, it's our last big word for the night. Venn neurons are the neurons that activate when you're doing nothing and you're just chilling and you're not thinking about anything. And notice when you're doing nothing and you're just chilling and you're not thinking about anything, notice how you start worrying about yourself and your problems. Your insecurities bubble to the surface. Your stress and your trauma bubbles to the surface. That time back in 1988, someone borrowed something off you that they still haven't returned and you want them dead. That time someone said something to you and you're rehearsing your speech in your mind. I should have said this, should have given them a piece of my mind. Years and years later, you can still do it, can't you? And why? Because when you don't focus on anything, your brain is in idle. The Venn's neurons activate. And do you know what they do? In the absence of focus, they take your focus and they put it on yourself. And for some reason, they've studied this but can't explain why, the focus on yourself tends toward the negative. So the lack of focus, not focusing on something, when you think you're relaxing by not focusing on something, what happens is your brain says, oh, you're not focusing on something. Let me give you a few things to focus on. Sets off some hand grenades in your soul. You feel worse, you start to have panic attacks, you're prone to anxiety. Even a healthy person that's not got an anxiety disorder can become very anxious and very depressed and very negative and very down just by doing nothing. So the idea of doing nothing is not how you guard your heart. How you guard your heart is you harness the power of focus, okay? The Bible teaches us two primary ways to do it, and I'm going to finish by just giving you a speed idea around what these two ways are. The first one is found in Philippians chapter 4, verse 4 through to 9. It's the fourth chapter of Philippians, and it starts in verse 4. Listen to how Paul takes the Philippians from a crazy background, and he teaches them something very important. He teaches them, how do I harness the power of focus? He teaches them how they change where they shine the lens of their mind, and he gives them what you would have to say is a stunning systematic process that even a psychologist would say that is actually really good for you and corresponds to all the research we know about how you create a state of contentment and peace in your life. Listen to what he says. Verse 4 of Philippians chapter 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice. Rejoice. Do you know what rejoice means? Rejoice means to act out joy. It means to marinate in joy, to ruminate in joy. Now, of course, you and I live in a world where we've been taught that our feelings rule and however I feel rules, but that's actually not how it works. And one of the big secrets to mental health and one of the big secrets to the flourishing life is learning that I can change the state of my being. It's not just a set thing. Just because I feel sad doesn't mean I have to be sad. And there's some ways you do it, harnessing the power of focus in what you do. So Paul says, here's a good one. Rejoice in the Lord. Act out joy in the Lord. Now this is good because there's many things in you that are not a source of joy. There's many things in you, Maria Kondo would say, does it spark joy? It's gone. Thank you for your service. We watched that series and then my wife looked at me and said, do you spark joy? I ended up in a garbage bag in the basement. Rejoice, okay? Don't rejoice in you. Don't rejoice in your story. You don't have to. I can't rejoice in my story. No, I couldn't. Rejoice in your problem. No. I heard some stupid, idiotic sermon a little while ago. I was in Bible college, and here it was, just rejoice in your problem. You know, your car broke down. Just rejoice that your car, oh, Lord, I thank you my car broke down. What type of idiot wants to live in this delusional denial where we convince ourselves that something negative is positive just because we're idiotic and no one else in the rest of the world does that, but we're Christians, so let's just be real dumb. Don't rejoice in your problem. God, I thank you, my car. Do you think God's up in heaven going, good, I smashed your car just so you would know how much I love you? I'm not rejoicing in my problem. I'm rejoicing in the Lord. God, when nothing else is good in your life, you can stand there and say, God, nothing else is good, but man, you're good. And you can act out joy. Do you know, as I learnt to do this, I actually learnt to start my day off depressed, but not keep going as a depressed person. I learned to get out of bed, and though I felt like dying, and my habit was always to say, God, if you're real, let me get hit by a bus today. And even after God became real and I'd said yes to the gospel, and I was still praying that stupid prayer by default, was automatically going through my mind, and I had to break that power by harnessing the power of focus. And the way I did it was getting up and saying, man, I feel like rubbish, and I feel like killing myself, and I feel like smoking weed, and I feel like drinking to oblivion, and I feel like dying, but instead, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord, and God, you are good. When I got saved, you didn't have Spotify, my friends. You had cassette tapes. And you couldn't just go straight to your favorite track. You had to wind the tape. You know what I'm saying? You should be blessed. You live in the era where you can say, hey, Google, play This Is How I Fight My Battles for me. And you can rejoice in the Lord. When you do that, you're harnessing the power of focus. That's why Christian worship is important. In fact, you hear it all the way through the Psalms. Magnify the Lord with me. When you magnify something, you take a magnifying and you hold it. A magnifying glass is a lens, and you hold it over the thing and it makes the thing bigger. And the psalmist says, take the focus in your mind, harness it and shine it on God instead of your problem. You're harnessing the power of focus. Rejoice in the Lord. Then listen to what he says. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. That means it's kind of important. When was the last time you tried that in the face of a challenge? When you're feeling broken, when you're feeling tempted, when you're feeling backsliding. I'll tell you what you do. You don't feel like doing this because you get tricked into thinking that my state of emotion rules my life and I have to do everything that my emotions are telling me to do. But you will find, if you will practice the art of rejoicing in the Lord, that you will find that once you take a posture of joy and once you start focusing on the joy of the Lord, you will find ultimately that you lose focus on all your other stuff and you will even get a little bit joyful. Listen to what he says. Let your gentleness be evident to all. That means cultivate the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex, where love and compassion and empathy. What happens is when you feel really bad, you're not very gentle with others, are you? You're wanting them to be gentle with you, but you want to walk around, out of my way. So what do? You take a different posture. Take a posture of love. Take a posture of compassion. Take a posture of gentleness. What am I doing? I'm harnessing the power of focus, not focusing on myself, not focusing on my problem. For the Lord is near. Listen to this. Don't be anxious about anything. Everybody say anxious. Actually, the word anxious doesn't mean this. Oh my gosh, I'm worried. The biblical word anxious means this: to have your mind divided, to be two-minded. Notice that's what happens to you, right? God's good, but is he really? God will supply my needs. Oh, will he? Being double-minded, being two-minded, having your focus split in half. So why Paul's not saying, if you are suffering anxiety, he's not saying, don't do that, you're naughty. But he's saying, here's what you do. Don't allow yourself to fluctuate between two things. Take the power of focus and harness it. Don't be anxious. Don't let your mind stay in two different, a scattered focus, split focus, just scattering around all over the place. Harness the power of focus. Listen to what he says. Don't be anxious, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. That word prayer, everybody say prayer. It's this word proseuchomai in the ancient Greek language that Paul was writing in. Proseuchomai means to meditate on, to mutter, to mumble, to wish, to ruminate. Now here's the thing, it's a word we translated as prayer, but what it really is, it goes for all the traffic that goes through your heart and your mind and soul. And you're an expert at ruminating, you do it all the time. You said, oh man, should I do this or do this? Oh man, I'd really love to get that car. Oh wow, I wonder when I'm ever going to get married. Or if you're married, I wonder when I'm ever going to have kids. And if you've got kids, I wonder if my kids are ever going to stop being evil. And you ruminate all the time. You've got stuff going through your head, traffic, thought traffic. Isn't that true? So you're an expert in this thing called proseuchomai. You meditate, you wish, you mutter, you mumble, you circulate thoughts through your heart and soul. So listen to what Paul says. You're doing it anyway, do it to God. So it goes from being like this, I wonder what's going to happen. Oh man, am I going to have enough money to pay the bills? Oh man, am I ever going to get free of this drug addiction? Oh man, I feel really bad. God, am I ever going to get free of this drug addiction? See what he's saying? Do what you already ruminate in stuff. You already mutter and mumble and circulate and percolate in your junk. And he says, oh, do it to God though. I found I never took that stuff to God before. It was a revelation for me to say, I can come to God and say, God, my dad, I feel so flawed and broken and ashamed and filthy. Would you please clean me? And as I learned to do that, to take my ruminations and do it in a Godward direction, my life began to change. It's a powerful truth, my friend. In every situation with prayer and petition and thanksgiving, present your request to God. Listen to this. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. That's what I experienced. If you will harness the power of focus and live a Philippians 4 life, Paul says, you recruit the resources of heaven and then you're not guarding your heart and your mind on your own. Now you're guarding it with the peace of God that transcends all understanding. So do you want to have to guard your heart on your own, doing it your own way? How's your own way been working for you? Or do you want to do it with the resources of heaven mustered to your disposal? Now the peace of God that transcends my mind. So Pastor Ben, will you pray for me for peace? Look, I will pray for you for peace, but what Paul says is you have to learn to rejoice in the Lord. You have to learn to act gently, lovingly, and compassionately when you don't feel like it. You have to learn to take the ruminating that you always do anyway and do it in a Godward direction. You have to learn to harness the power of focus and not have a million thoughts in your mind, but focus on what you're wanting to focus on. And if you do all that, then the peace of God will help you guard your heart and mind. I want that life. What about you? As I learned to do it, I found life radically and drastically changed for me, and God began to heal me. And as I stopped focusing on the trauma and the abuse and began to focus on the goodness of God, life began to change for me. And the depression and the addiction and the rejection and the emotional state that I'd spiraled into, do you know what happened? I spiraled out of it. When you do this, that's called spiraling. When you do this, that's called soaring. That's what eagles do. And you can live a Bible life by guarding your heart and your soul and your mind, and what you spiraled into, God can help you soar out of, and you can do it. I know it doesn't feel like you can do it. It feels too easy. Romans chapter 12 tells you the last secret. Listen to this. How do I start? How do I harness the power of my focus? How do I begin to live the Philippians 4 life? Listen to this. Romans 12 verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. In view of God's mercy. Take a look at the mercy of God. This is Romans 12. Paul has taken the whole book of Romans to explain to you the mercy of God, who says every person is a sinner and the wages of that sin is death, but thanks be to God, Jesus Christ came and died for our sin on our behalf, and God, who is rich in mercy, gave us the great exchange. And Romans 1, Romans 2, Romans 3, 4, 5, 6 talks about the riches and the mercy of God in the great exchange. And then Paul gets to Romans 12 and he says, now that I've told you all about the gospel and the mercy of God, listen, now in view of God's mercy, what should you do? It's crucial that you get this point. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Worship is not singing songs, doing the two-step, jumping up and down. We do all those behaviors, but see, someone can come in and do all the worship behaviors and not be worshiping. True worship. God, in the Old Testament, they brought you lambs and goats and laid them before you as a gift. This is true worship. But I'm not bringing a lamb or a goat and laying it before you as a gift. I'm bringing me and laying it before you as a gift. And the good news is I don't have to die like a lamb or a goat, because Jesus died the last ever sacrifice once and for all. So I come as an alive sacrifice. I give myself to you. That's what worship is. Worship is ultimately transferring allegiance, transferring kingship from myself or my problems or my story or my desires or my thoughts or my feelings, transferring the allegiance where I am loyal to that to King Jesus and saying, I will be loyal to you. And I give myself over to God. Now listen, we have a fear because we are not natively God people. We are natively idolatrous. And we have been learnt through idolatry and magic and superstition that if I do the right behaviors, I manipulate the invisible world and then it owes me, so it'll do something. But if I don't do the right behaviors, the invisible world will take revenge on me and smash me. And then when something bad happens, I jump to the conclusion I must have done something wrong because the invisible world is attacking me for it. And we take that very human belief that's represented in so many cultures and we bring it into the Christian faith, and we think when I'm being blessed, it's because I've done the right thing, so God's happy with me. But when something's not going right, I jump to the conclusion God's angry with me, and it makes me hide and run away from God. And then to assuage ourselves of this problem, what we do is we say, then I know what I'll do. I'll do the right things and I'll practice the right practices and I'll do the right stuff and I'll clap my hands and I'll tithe and I'll give all the stuff that in the Christian life we do anyway. But we start to switch and we say, I'm going to do all this because if I do all this, maybe God will be happy with me. And we think we're earning God's love and we think we're earning God's favor and we think that we're doing something that will make God love us more. And Paul says, no, that's not what worship is. Listen, in view of God's mercy, take a good look at the mercy of God. Take a good look at the grace of God. Take a good look at the awesome life God offers you for free in grace, gratis, nada. And then that does something to you. Worship a view of God's grace creates a response. God, you're awesome, and I give myself to you. Paul says, in view of God's mercy, offer your body as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. That's your true worship. Listen to what he says. The outcome. Then you won't be conformed to the pattern of this world, listen, but you'll be transformed by the renewing of your mind. What's inside you will be transformed. First, view God's mercy, then become a sacrifice, then you will be transformed.